Welcome back to True Crime and Tea, or welcome to True Crime and Tea if this is your first time here. Hello and welcome. Here we explore the darkest corners of human behaviour with nuance, empathy, and a commitment to ethical storytelling. Today's case is one that shakes the very foundation of trust. It's the story of Orville Lynn Majors, a former Indiana nurse convicted of killing 6 patients and suspected of being involved in over 100 more deaths. This case infuriates everything in me. If I see these cases, the fire inside, so I will attempt to not let too much fire come out. But this case is about power, vulnerability, and the terrifying reality of medical serial offenders. Individuals who exploit the very systems that are put in place to protect us. So grab your tea, settle in, and let's unpack the life crimes, psychology, and systemic failures surrounding the case of Orville Lynn Majors. Evil Lynn Majors. I'm gonna take a sip of my coffee. It's been coffee for the last 3 weeks. I need to find some interesting other drinks to drink. So if you've got any beverage suggestions, please drop them in the comments, because I just drink coffee and I do drink tea, like brewed tea. I drink herbal tea sometimes, but I need interesting drinks to drink. So please make some suggestions. I may make them on camera while I'm talking. I don't know, but just give me some tea suggestions. Thanks. Orville Lynn Majors was born on April the 24th, 1964 in the United States of America. And unlike many serial offenders, Majors' early life did not present the typical markers of extreme trauma or instability. This is one of very few that we have done in the last couple episodes. He trained as a licensed practical nurse and eventually worked in a hospital in Vermilion County, which is in Clinton, Indiana. So that's where he started off his nursing journey. This is important. Majors does not fit the stereotypical narrative of a violent offender that has been shaped by childhood chaos. He does not fit that stereotypical narrative. Instead, his story highlights a different pathway, one that's rooted in personality traits, workplace dynamics, and access to the vulnerable population. Before Majors joined Vermilion County Hospital, the faculty averaged around 26 patient deaths per year. After Evil Majors began working there, that number skyrocketed from 26 to 100 deaths per year. Colleagues noticed that deaths spiked during his shifts, and he showed hostility towards elderly patients. They also noticed that he made really disturbing comments about the patient, including calling patients white trash or weaklings. And they had heard him express that elderly people should be gassed, as in, the gas chamber, or this is the person that was looking after patients in a caring profession. One nurse recalled asking Majors what he was doing at the bedside of an agitated elderly patient, and his reply was,
"Waiting for her to die."
And minutes later after that statement, she did. Did no one see the red flag? I mean, death, that image of death, right? Okay. I don't know. Because this isn't just inappropriate behaviour. It's not just a little kiki. It's a chilling insight into a worldview that dehumanized the very people he was meant to be caring for and looking after. Now, when everything came to fruition, investigators concluded that Orville Majors likely used potassium chloride injections, which can trigger cardiac arrest. They also concluded that other fast-acting substances were accessible to medical staff, so it could have been one of those other fast-acting substances that he had used. The negative of these methods is that they leave minimal traces, especially with elderly patients who have pre-existing conditions. The assumption is if they're an older person, they have a heart attack, well, they were old, so why would you investigate it effectively? And this is why medical serial offenders are often called angels of death. I really hate the fact that there's angel in that sentence, but that's how they refer to angels of death. And this is why they can operate undetected for so many years, because the methods that they use, I mean, they're not dumb. They've been trained in medicine, nursing for 3 to 4 years, so they're gonna know what can and can't be used, what shouldn't be used. They're gonna have the know-how, so this is why they get away with it for as long as they do. Majors targeted elderly patients, those who complained, so not necessarily elderly, but those who complained, those who required extra care, or individuals that he just found demanding. That's how he referred to them. There was demanding patients who needed care. So effectively, his victims were not chosen at random. They were chosen based on his personal irritation and desire for control, because he was the one that was able to dictate when these people died, which is crazy. By 1995, the hospital's mortality rate had become impossible to ignore. There's no way you can ignore a 26 average, now 100 average deaths a year. And because of this, Major's nursing license was actually suspended. And almost immediately after this suspension, the death rate returned to normal levels. That is a massive red flag. That again, and this correlation then triggered a full investigation by the state of Indiana, because they could not ignore the fact that we've suspended this one nurse's license and now all of a sudden their death rate has gone back to normal. And what the investigation found was there was a 40% increase in deaths during Major shifts. When he was on shift, there was a 40% increase in the deaths. They also found witnesses who heard him express hatred for the elderly patients or towards the elderly patients. They found lethal substances in his locker. Now, anyone that's been a nurse, you know that you end up with loads of stuff in your pockets, but medicines, especially in the UK, we've got like controlled substances lockers and stuff like that. Obviously this is 1995, so these kind of things are new, but that is kind of monitored. However, they found loads of stuff in his locker, and they also found patterns of sudden cardiac arrest events in patients under his care. So he was the only one, not the only one, but he was glaringly obvious to be related to these sudden events of cardiac arrest. Majors was arrested in December of 1997, and his trial included testimony from 79 witnesses. I would argue, where were these 79 witnesses when these events were taking place, like early on, where you noticed there was an increase and where you heard him making these statements? Whistleblowing is a thing, but okay, because is that not like capability? You're talking derogatory about patients, and you're standing over patients saying you're waiting for them to die. Is that not a performance management issue? I don't know. Although investigators believed Majors was connected to about 130 deaths, the judge ruled that evidence about these mysterious deaths was too extensive for the jury to process. So instead, prosecutors focused on 6 specific cases with the strongest evidence. I think that sounds lazy, but that's just me, because it sounds like they're saying, oh, there's just too much evidence to look at for 130 people, we're just going to look at 6. That's a really small amount compared to the amount of people that had been killed by him, but that's the justice system for you. Majors was convicted of 6 counts of murder and sentenced to 360 years in prison, 60 years for each of his victims. So essentially, if one of the victims gets overturned, there's still the other 5. So that's 300 years, and then 240 years, and then, so he's never getting out of prison. His family, though, insisted that he was a scapegoat by hospital management, because why would they believe that he is a homicidal maniac? And Majors himself claimed that the high amount of deaths that were happening was due to his overtime hours. That I found an interesting point, because essentially it's still happening while you're there. When you're not there, these deaths are not occurring. So you using the argument that it's due to your overtime hours still doesn't prove that you are not responsible for the deaths, in my opinion. But that's what he argued. And the courts were in agreement with this, because the statistical patterns, the witness testimony, and the physical evidence told a completely different story than the argument that he was making and the argument that his family were making on his behalf. He was the one that was present for majority of these deaths, so it's almost, how can you take his side? Do you know what I mean? I'm being very biased here, but I don't care. So let's look at this through an academic lens and try and be a bit objective about it. And I want to look at it through a few different lenses. So the first is criminology, medical serial offenders and opportunity structures. Essentially, they are the opportunistic offender because they are in the right place at the right time, or the wrong place at the right time, whichever way you want to look at it. Medical serial killers often share characteristics such as access to vulnerable patients. Obviously, they are medical professionals that work in an industry where people are at risk of different diseases and obviously at risk of death. They also have the ability to disguise a murder as a natural death, like Majors did. They have the knowledge of undetectable substances because they learn about medicines management, and they are in a position of trust that discourages suspicion. You're a nurse. You wouldn't do anything to harm me. Essentially, that's the assumption. So all of those things compounded make them the invisible person. There is no way you would assume that a healthcare professional would do anything to harm a patient. And Majors fits this pattern. His crimes were facilitated by a lack of oversight, high patient turnover, limited forensic testing in elderly patients, because again, the assumption is they're old, they died of a heart attack or cardiac arrest. Why would they do forensic testing on an older patient? And then you've got the culture of defense to medical staff. It's kind of the same as saying, well, invisibility, they're in a position of trust. Why would they commit such heinous crimes? The second lens is psychology, power, control, and dehumanization. Majors comments about the elderly, the ones that he, would call them white trash. He would say that they were irritating. He would say he's waiting for them to die. What these reveal is deep contempt for these patients, for these people. He dehumanized them. They were not people in his eyes, and a belief that certain lives were less valuable. I'm just going to leave that there. I don't think that needs to be expanded on anymore, because it's very, very obvious that that's how he viewed his patients, if you can even call them his patients, because he did not have patience with them. This aligns with traits seen in antisocial personality disorder, the sociopath. However, he didn't have a rocky upbringing, so I don't know if he can be called a sociopath. Malignant narcissism and sadistic tendencies. I would say he's an extreme narcissist, because he, especially with what the family was saying about him as well, he's been scapegoated. I'm the victim here. I'm the victim. You are making me out to be an evil person, when actually it's only because I was doing overtime why there's so many deaths on the times that I am, on the wards. Absolute narcissist. But importantly, we need to remember that not all individuals with these traits become violent. Just because someone has antisocial personality disorder, it does not mean that they are going to become a homicidal maniac. I use that word a lot. I need to find another word to use. But it doesn't mean that they're going to become this person. It is a trait that someone may have. It doesn't equal violence. Major's violence was shaped by opportunity, not just personality. He had access to the substances or to the methods to commit these homicides, and he had access to the patients to get rid of them, essentially, to carry out his evil actions. The third lens is sociology, ageism and the value of elderly lives. Now, unfortunately, in society today, elderly people are a throwaway concept. Not everyone views them as this, but unfortunately, they are a population of people that are not treated with the utmost respect, and I think they should be, especially when it comes to things like, you know, you've got immigrant family members maybe that have traveled to another land and they've worked their whole lives, and unfortunately one day they get sick. The system is not built to take care of old people if they are poor, for one, but also they're almost forgettable. They're no longer contributing to society, even though they contributed to society for the last 60 years. They are kind of seen as less important as someone who is younger. So ageism is a major thing in this case. And Majors targeted older adults, a group that are often marginalized in a healthcare setting, often ignored in healthcare settings. Anyone's been a carer, they usually talk to the carer and don't talk to the elderly person, when the elderly person is very much able to talk for themselves. So this case exposes how ageism can mask abuse, how elderly deaths are often dismissed as expected, even if they are relatively healthy. Just because they're in hospital doesn't necessarily mean they're at death's door, if that makes sense. And how systemic biases can allow predators to operate undetected. The bias is, you're old, you're gonna pass away at some point. When the inevitable happens, or the supposed inevitable happens, there's no further action. For example, there was no forensic testing because they were elderly patients and the expectation was that they were going to die anyway. The fourth lens is organisational studies, so hospital culture and oversight failures, which is kind of linked to the previous point. The hospital environment played a key role in this case because there was lack of morality tracking. The fact that someone can say out loud over a patient that they're waiting for them to die. And when I read that, I was like, the patient may have been asleep, but some people are still quite aware of their surroundings when they're asleep. Do you know what I mean? So just imagine him standing over the patient. Oh, what are you doing, Orville? Waiting for her to die. Like, what? And that person didn't flag it. That's crazy. So the lack of morality tracking, minimal supervision, no early intervention despite the red flags that were glaringly obvious, and a culture that discouraged questioning colleagues. I would say it's not really changed that much because there is still this culture of protection amongst certain staff members when it comes to healthcare professions. There's some movement towards improvement. For example, in the UK, we've got the Freedom to Speak Up Guardians, that if you feel there's something untoward happening and you can't really escalate it up the correct levels, then you've got someone who is neutral to speak to. But I still don't think there's a culture that encourages questioning colleagues and challenging colleagues' behaviour. So this is something that comes up in this case. This wasn't just an individual crime, it was a systemic failure. He did this 110 times, 130 times, even though they selectively just looked at 6. The fifth point is ethics, trust, care, and the vulnerability of patients. Ethically, when they heard some of the statements he made, they should have raised a concern. Healthcare is built on trust, and Majors weaponized that trust. He almost knew nobody's going to talk about what I'm doing, and the patients trust me because I'm a nurse. So his case forced us to confront the ethical responsibilities of caregivers, the need for robust reporting systems, and the importance of protecting vulnerable populations. I mean, this was in 1995. A lot has changed in the last 31 years when it comes to healthcare and the healthcare system. Has it improved? I mean, I can't. Has it improved? Let me know. Let me know in the comments. This was 31 years ago, and you would hope to think that some of the culture and some of the behaviors have changed. But I'm going to leave that for you to tussle in the comments about that. Orville, I keep on wanting to say Evil Lynn. Orville Lynn Majors' crimes remind us that danger doesn't always come from strangers in dark alleys. Sometimes it comes from those entrusted with our care. This case is almost a call to action, kind of. For better insight, for stronger protections, and for healthcare systems that value every life equally. And this is something that is openly discussed when it comes to racism within certain within certain healthcare systems, ageism within certain healthcare systems, and how improvements can be made to ensure that each patient has a voice, each patient is treated with equity and equally, and how we can provide better health outcomes for all of our patients that come through the door. Because most importantly, this is a reminder to honour the victims of this case, individuals who deserve dignity, compassion and safety, and recognise that patients now who are of a similar type to the victims in this case also deserve dignity, compassion and safety when they come into our healthcare institutions. And that's it for today. I think that one was quicker than the last couple of weeks, but thank you for spending time with me today. If you appreciate deep dive, academically grounded true crime that centers victims and challenges harmful narratives, make sure to like, share, subscribe, turn on that notification bell so you know when a new video is released. And as usual, take care of yourselves and others, and drink your tea, your beverage. Like I said, I need some beverage suggestions, please. And I'll see you in the next episode. Bye. I was going to do the Sheila LaBar one again, but I don't like the way the script is written, so I'm going to have to rewrite the script for that one. And probablemente will release it this one. So, yeah. Anyway, bye.